My voice is usually loud enough. I don't bother with microphones. Is everybody here at the back okay? Very good. I'm going to start with an apology. There are a lot of familiar faces out there from the past, but also some of you were present in Glasgow and London and New Zealand last year when I did more or less the same presentation. You won't spot it because once again I've changed the title. But I will be asking questions later and checking up on you. Okay. Useful to start with a definition of sustainability. All of us talk an awful lot about it without sometimes really knowing what it is, or finding out afterwards that we're talking about completely different things. One definition that comes to mind is this one from the Brundtland Commission, the United Nations Commission, I believe, set up in the late 80s, I think. Not exactly sure when it was, doesn't matter, but sometime around 30 years ago. Being able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Just imagine when you're making a decision in the tannery or the chemical firm, wherever you're working, just imagine your children are watching you, their children, and all the generations to come. Just think about that. That's the full implication of what this statement means. Really looking down the road. What you do today is not independent. It has an impact, not just today, but in the future, on future generations. Make sure you give them fair consideration. Why has it all come to a head? The population is going up to 9 billion by 2050. I think we're in the high sevens at the moment, not exactly sure, but continues to increase. All those people are going to need food, they're going to need water, they're going to need fuel, they need to keep warm, they need to be able to eat. If we keep polluting the world the way we are and using up all the natural resources, the problems we face today in hunger and social inadequacies are going to be far more severe with that bigger population. We've already spoken a few times today about the increasing awareness. Just look at the pressure on the chrome story. People who knew nothing about it are getting interested, not just in chrome, but all the other aspects of leather making and the use of leather. It's not just the individuals, it's companies, the brands that you're supplying. They all want a clean supply chain. A few years ago we could get away with just really looking at what we do ourselves in our own factories, saying we're being responsible there, that's the end of it. That no longer applies. We have to be much more open, look at the whole supply chain, right from the very beginning, all the way through to the end of life, or hopefully the start of a new life. We have to take responsibility and contribute. We can wait and sit back until the government does it for us, but if we do that, it'll be too late. Already the damage is done. The decisions usually taken by the government don't represent the interests of the industry. We're the ones that know what we're talking about. Why aren't we the ones making the decisions? I've already mentioned that a lot of the brands out there are looking for a clean supply chain. I mentioned CSR here, corporate social responsibility, more or less the same thing as sustainability. You've seen what happens in the Leather Working Group. There are now 250 tanneries in there, around about 50 brands, 40 suppliers. Many of those brands will only buy from tanneries who've already been audited by the Leather Working Group. They're looking to make sure that the supply chain is clean, or as clean as it can possibly be using today's technology. Within Stahl, we believe that CSR, corporate social responsibility, has become something you have to have. It's not just a choice, it's something you have to do. One of the things we did to show commitment, we signed up for the UN Global Compact. That means we comply to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. We have to publish a global report on sustainability. It comes out in March every year. It's on the Stahl website now, you can see it. We have to show what we're doing. Not just our environmental performance, but our social performance as well. On top of all the other wider issues on sustainability, We have the issue of the leather industry, considered by many to be a very dirty operation. Just look at YouTube, look at tanning of leather. What do you see? You see a horror story from Bangladesh, somewhere like that. You don't see a clean European tannery. People want to publish the bad news. That's where the image comes from. The special interest groups are watching. Greenpeace have been mentioned, World Wildlife Trust, many others are watching, expecting us to improve, in many cases forcing us to improve. The automotive industry, for those of you supplying the automotive, they're looking to become greener. What are car companies now? They're not really manufacturers, they're assembly units. They take what you and others supply and all the parts, put them together. The answers towards greener products have to come from you. Nice example, I've used of that a few times, some of you have heard it before. Sitting with the boss of BMW Holland once, talking about a lighter weight option for leather, saying we can make leather about 30% lighter now. Would you like it in your cars? Probably not, because it's only going to take a kilo out of a car. He replied by saying we've just changed the screws of the car from steel to aluminium. It saved 50 grams a vehicle. So think about that, think what your customers are looking for. They're looking for perhaps far more than you're thinking of. Make sure they're aware of what you have to offer. Last point on this slide, one I've already mentioned. Don't just think what you're doing in your own factory. What we did in Stahl, we employed or used the Natural Step, a Swedish NGO, to help us on the road to sustainability. They introduced us to the complete life cycle analysis, sustainable life cycle analysis. We got some shocks when we did it. We thought we were being very responsible to a great extent. We were being responsible, but we weren't looking far enough back down the original supply chain. We were not considering the end of life. We're selling products to you, the tanners. You're using it in the leather, perhaps for a shoe. That shoe is going to end up in a landfill. Our chemical is in that shoe. What's it going to look like in 20 years' time? Is it still going to be in the leather? Will it have bleached out? Will it have got into the local water table? That's how far our responsibility goes. Going even beyond that, end of life was a thing we used to talk about a few years ago, cradle to grave. Now we talk about cradle to cradle. How do we ensure that product is reused, going into something else useful, not being thrown away? That was the general introduction to sustainability. Now, what specifically can we do in the leather and the leather chemical industry? You know all of these parts, but again, going through the whole operation, considering the raw material, all the way through to the disposal part. One of the first things that's come up, again from Greenpeace, pushing tanners to look at traceability. Do you really know where your hides are coming from? Some of us were present in a leather working group meeting 4 or 5 years ago in Arzignano, where Greenpeace came in and attacked on this, accusing tanners of taking hides, cattle and hides, from areas of the Amazon biozone that had been deforested, and accusing them also of taking hides of cattle from farms using slave labour. The particular tannery that featured in that was very well prepared, gave a very strong reply, which was completely ignored by the world press. They only chose to feature the Greenpeace story. Out of that, the Brazilian tanners and many others are very conscious of traceability. They can't quite go back to the farm the animal was raised on, but they can certainly go as far back as the slaughterhouse. It's becoming more and more important. In Stahl, we're involved with a project with the Dutch veal industry, where we're starting with the traceability of each individual hide. So throughout that project, until it ends up in a pair of shoes or whatever, you will be able to go onto the computer and see where that animal was raised, which farm it was raised on. So traceability, one of the key elements to come. Also, we have to be more aware on animal husbandry. I think you were talking from the New Zealand side, an awful lot of work going on there. When Reg and I were kids in the UK leather industry, an awful lot of work was done by the Hide Improvement Society on the eradication of the warble fly, which worked very effectively. It's gone, you never see it. The hides in our day used to have a back full of holes. What have we done since then? Very little. The agricultural industry is coming under tremendous pressure, tremendous scrutiny. We should also be pushing them for improvement. It actually helps the leather industry if you have cleaner hides, better hides, animals that have had a better life, produce better hides. It's in our interest, it's also in the social interest. And that's one of the things you find in the whole sustainability story, that things that maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago didn't fit, may not have been financially worth doing, may have been impossible to do. The world has changed, waste costs have gone up, social pressures are far more. It's always time to revisit, look at some of the things you've dismissed in the past, they may well fit today. We know that on a raw hide, only about 25 to 35% of it, the original hide, ends up in leather, the rest is waste. What's the first thing we used to do with a raw hide? Cover it in salt, take it to a tannery, wash off the salt and increase the pollution load in the tannery. Why aren't we doing more processing of hides at source? Not just reducing the salt, but also getting rid of the waste material at that point, so you're only transporting stuff that you're actually going to use. There was a brief mention earlier on the carbon footprint of leather. That's something we're going to see, at least in the EEC. Started with the EEC looking to have a carbon footprint when you go in a shoe shop, bag shop, whatever. You can make a conscious decision. This shoe has a carbon footprint up here, this one is down here. Your choice, which one do you want to buy? In the early stages, it looked as though leather was going to carry the whole carbon footprint of the life cycle of the animal. The problem we had with that is the life cycle of the animal is about 20 times higher than the carbon footprint of the leather processing. So whatever you did in your tannery made virtually no impact. You were in that final 4 or 5%. Whatever we could do as a chemical supplier also would have virtually no impact. Put out a better chemical solution, you wouldn't even see it in the carbon footprint. This really wasn't working for anybody, that original European idea. So they got all the industries together who came up with a compromise solution. Now the dairy industry is going to carry 88% of the carbon footprint of the animal. The remaining 12% goes to the slaughterhouse. Of that 12%, the hide will only carry about 3.5%. So it's something like 0.4% of the life cycle of the animal. Almost negligible. But what it means now, when you look at the carbon footprint, about 60 to 80%, depending on the process, is going to come from the chemicals used. So very important then, you're using the right chemicals, studying what you're doing, that the chemical suppliers are also being very responsible in supplying the right things. What can we do in the wet processing? How to tan? We've already had the chrome story, very important one. Stahl in a slightly different position to Lanxess. We're not in the chrome business. We're supplying alternatives to chrome, but hopefully we're doing that in a responsible way. We're not the ones that are going out and saying chrome is bad. All we're saying is there are people out there who want to use alternatives. We offer an alternative, as do plenty of other suppliers. Let's hope all the other chemical suppliers are being equally responsible, and we are not the ones that are trying to drag down chrome. Personally, I would agree with everything said on the panel earlier. It looks a very safe solution and should be around for plenty of time to come. What about all the waste? Again, when some of us were starting in the leather industry, we used to have hair save processes. We could wash the hair afterwards. It was used in stuffing mattresses. It had some commercial value. Very quickly that disappeared. We went to hair digestion systems. That increases the load in the effluent. It also wastes what could be a valuable material again. Hair is one of those things we need to look at. We save the wool on the sheep, we don't save the hair on the cow. Because it became commercially unviable, maybe that is no longer the case. Time for another look. The Scottish leather industry has set a very good example of what can be done with waste material in the tannery. The incineration process they're running ahead of almost any tannery in the world. Not sending everything to the dump, getting away from it, recirculating it, burning it, getting energy, using that energy. That is the way forward. The issues of RSL, MRSL came up beforehand. RSL, restricted substance list. The issue we have with that, every single brand has their own. Surely there is one limit at which a chemical can safely be used and above which it's not safe to use. Why does every brand have their own list? One of the things we're doing within the Leather Working Group, and the three of us here on the suppliers subgroup, working very hard towards offering a single restricted substance list. Yes, we need one. We don't need 100 different ones. The MRSL that's mentioned, that's come from again from a Greenpeace initiative, the Dirty Laundry campaign, where they accused the apparel industry of discharging, I think there are 11 families of chemicals. At lower levels, not particularly hazardous chemicals, but the ones that are indestructible. So in time they're going to build up and up and up, and just like the plastic in the ocean, once it reaches a certain level, it does become damaging. Any chemical does. So the difference is I think 21 brands got together, discussed how to handle this, started with the textile industry, but then moved on to the leather industry, again working with the Leather Working Group directly on a sensible list for chemicals. But the big difference between the M at the beginning, the manufacturer's restricted substance list applies to the chemical that you use in the tannery. It does not apply to what's in the leather. Next point on upgrading. All too often tanners send a hide the whole way through, get to the finishing, think this doesn't look so good, let's use a stucco coat or something else to try and cover the damage. Surely you should start upgrading the moment you put the hide into work. Plenty of things you can do in the beam house, the tanning, the retanning, all the way through to try and improve the quality. Remember that the fashion industry is coming under tremendous pressure, again from the same NGOs who are giving us all the other issues. They're part of what's called the disposable society. You make a shoe that contains plenty of valuable raw material, you wear it once, stick it in the back of the cupboard, and it sits there forever. Surely if we're to be responsible, we should be using those valuable raw materials for their full life, wearing the shoe until it actually wears out, and to make sure it should last longer, extend the life of the shoe. Don't go for the quick throwaway product, look at extending the life cycle. All of that can come from upgrading at every stage of the process. I've already mentioned the lighter weight leather as an option. What about finishing? A delicate balance between performance. The finish helps with the performance generally, but it also can detract from the natural look of the leather. Get that balance right. Very, very important. Plenty of room for improvement in the actual processing. Look at roller coating to replace spraying. Something like a 40% improvement or reduction in waste when you go to roller coating as opposed to spraying. The technology is there, the roller coaters have improved so much, no longer just for base coating but also for top coating as well. There are plenty of tanners now at the point of switching 100% to roller coating rather than spraying. Rather exciting one for me within Stahl, being very closely involved with it. You're aware that most of the resins used in leather finishing, acrylics, polyurethanes particularly, the basic raw material is crude oil. We don't use crude oil, but we use derivatives of crude oil to make those products. We had a great headline on the Stahl stand in the Shanghai Fair, I think a few years ago. Stahl cuts 200 million years off its production time. You saw people walk past the stand and look at it, and they all had to come back and ask what the hell it was all about. That's how long it takes to make crude oil. From the time that plant is buried, roughly about 200 million years later, you've got crude oil. It's a natural material from plants. Why don't you just go to the farm and get the same products? An oversimplification, yes, but not too much of one. What we've found in introducing these bio-based polyurethanes, even in the very early stages, no loss of performance. So you have probably 50, 60, 70 years of research going into the oil-based polyurethanes. Starting with the bio-based, from day one, we're able to match that performance. Where we're going to be in 5 years, 10 years' time. Great story. Take that one to the car companies. Gets a huge amount of interest. All the brands as well. Looking forward to seeing it. Mentioned dye-ingress on the last point. Could be anything. Anything you can do to extend the life of the leather. Get away from this throwaway society idea. Extend the life, make the product last longer. Get true value from the precious raw materials you've used. Going beyond that, what about cutting and sewing? We're aware that one of the problems for the leather industry is the inefficiency. It's an irregular shape, and there are lots of marks on the hide. They're not perfect. But a lot of the handbag brands, for example, are promoting those so-called defects. I'd call them natural features rather than defects. Scars that don't detract from the performance, even insect damage. It doesn't detract from the performance of the leather. It shows it's real leather. It's a natural feature. Shouldn't we be promoting it? Very difficult to do, particularly to the car companies. I know, but good luck with it. But on a car seat, the cutting yield is about 50%. Slightly higher for smaller pieces, shoes and bags, but still a huge amount of wastage. The biggest single step forward we can make is improving the cutting yield. Great for the tanners, but also great in reducing all the waste, all the throwaway stuff. Is it worth, again, considering finishing cut parts? What happens when you finish the leather, that finish can sometimes detract from the waste value of what would have been a crust leather without finish. It's happening now. Quite a lot of shoes have been done. We had one company 15 years ago in Germany trying to do it in automotive, actually cutting the parts first, then finishing them. They struggled with it at that time, but that's 15 years ago. Maybe technology has moved on. Isn't it time, again, we look at that? Better outlets for all the waste from the cutting room. Why do we just throw it away, give it to China? Look what the Scottish group are doing, burning it for their own use, generating energy. Shouldn't we be doing more of that? It is part of our responsibility to make sure that that part is looked after, not just the leather you sell, but the leather that comes out as waste as well. What about in construction? If we're going to have a lighter finish leather, a better looking leather, then make sure your design of the seat or whatever it is respects that. Don't have sharp pointed edges that isn't going to scuff more. Don't stick bags in shop windows if you've only got a dye instead of a pigment. You know there's going to be fading. So respect the limitations of what we're doing to improve the environmental performance. Be careful with it. Again, in construction, explore how far we can go with those natural markings. What can we do to improve that? Lamination, particularly for the automotive industry, a problem. How do you recycle a leather if you've stuck a piece of foam on the back? Maybe one of the best arguments for doing away with lamination, but it's difficult to recycle. During the life cycle, what should we be doing? Better advice to consumers on care. We all know that not most, but many of the products sold as aftercare products in shoe shops or wherever are actually doing more damage than good. They're actually detracting from the life of the article rather than helping it. Shouldn't we be doing more, again bearing in mind we want to lengthen the life cycle of everything? Shouldn't we be helping people come up with the right answers, looking for better solutions? We also have to ensure we give honest advice, what is and what is not leather. Many people are buying things with no idea which bit is leather, which bit isn't. Now getting to the exciting part, disposal or recycle. I was presenting more or less the same presentation, again I think with a different title, earlier this week in Holland. One of the other speakers was from the University of Loughborough, somebody I've been working very closely with over the past few years. What they've done in the University of Loughborough, they've identified quite correctly, there are about 20 billion pairs of shoes thrown away in the world every year. Nearly all of them end up in landfill. There's an awful lot of valuable raw material in that. Why aren't we helping recycling? The problem with the shoe and some other leather items, if you grind it up, you have a mix. It's not just leather, it's foam, it's rubber, whatever else in there, sometimes up to 20, 30 different components. What they've done in the University of Loughborough, they have a system of air knives and gravity filters which separate the different materials after they're being ground up. More or less they can get to 95% purity on the current state of the art there. The reason we got involved from the Stahl side was to help them find outlets for that. There are plenty of outlets, even if you just put that leather into cement to replace sand. You're adding 30 years to the life cycle of that pair of shoes or whatever it is. There must be more valuable ones. Plenty of people now starting to look to turn it into gelatin for the animal food chain, and even eventually perhaps for the human food chain. That would be more difficult, but it could come. What is going to happen if we sit back and don't do anything about it? It's already happened in the car industry. 95% of a vehicle in Europe, and I believe USA as well, and it's going to go to 100%, has to be recycled. What's going to happen with shoes? What's going to happen with bags? Landfill costs are just going to keep going up and up and up. It's another case where it's time to have a look. Things that were uneconomical a few years ago to do with recycling and everything, isn't it time to revisit that on a regular basis, see what we can do to make a change, get a better life out of those valuable raw materials? So, nicely on time, I think, coming to the conclusion. Always room for sustainability, always room for improvement. We need to be discussing it. We need to be very open. That's one of the things you learn when you go into this whole business of sustainability, transparency. You can no longer do things in a closed box. You need to be talking to your customers. You need to be talking to your suppliers and everyone else in the supply chain. Make sure you understand what they need, they understand what you can do. This is the way forward. Don't wait, excuse me, don't wait necessarily for the big home run, the things that are going to change everything. You can do little things every day. You do it in your own home, you turn your light switch off. Amazing how many people never turn the light off when they leave their office. They'll always do it in the house, they never do it in the office. Why? These are the sort of things we need to bring into our working lives, not just our domestic lives. The small things that make a difference. Start to do them today. Those small things all add up, and we can make a big difference and a greater future for our children, grandchildren, and many more generations to come. Thank you very much for your attention.